be here for long enough to recuse.
Pamela, do we have a quorum yet? Or Madeline, do we have a quorum?
Hi, Mr. Chair. We're having a bit of a technical issues. Give us about another minute or so we can bring on.
Of course. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't falling asleep with the switch here.
I think, assuming I'm the only one recused, there should be, it looks like, 4 people for the meat of the meeting.
I have to recuse myself as well, so.
Chair, there are a few more commissioners that I need to bring into the room.
Can you hear me okay?
This is Kelly. I'm just going to let you know I can't seem to get my video on, so I'm going to log out and log back in. Hi, Kelly here again. My video is kaput. I can either stick around without my face, or I can try to reboot, I think.
Mr. Chair, we'll go ahead and get started and wait for Commissioner Lethen to reboot. So hopefully by the time we get on with the rest of the business, she can join us. And Madeline, we can get started.
Okay. So we're ready to go, Pamela?
Yes.
All right. Here we go. Good evening and welcome to the August 17th, 2021 Planning Commission meeting. So all of you attending virtually, thank you for joining us. Please know that we want to hear from you. If you're in the audience and you would like to address the commission during public comment, for items on the agenda, there are 2 options. For those online using Zoom, please use the raise your hand button at the bottom of the screen when it is your turn to speak. You will be unmuted and given 3 minutes to address the commission. If you're joining us by telephone, you may address the commission by pressing *9 when it is your turn to speak. You will be unmuted and given 3 minutes to address the commission. Please note, you may only speak once per agenda item. Pamela, roll call, please.
Chair Biasotti.
Here.
Vice Chair Harmon.
Here.
Commissioner Durazo.
Here.
Commissioner Johnson. I believe she's being promoted to a panelist at the moment. I will come back. Commissioner Lethen is rebooting. Commissioner Madden?
Here.
Commissioner Morgan?
Here.
Let me see if Kelly is back here. Commissioner Johnson is now in the room. Commissioner Johnson?
Finally, thanks. I had some challenges there for a while.
Hey, Mary, we were doing roll call, so you want to say hi that you're here?
Here.
Okay. And has Kelly joined us yet?
Kelly has not.
Why don't we go ahead with the pledge and then we'll approval of the minutes, and then we'll hold up if she's not here for the action items.
Great.
Okay. Madeline, could we have the flag, please? Thank you. And Commissioner Morgan, would you be so kind as to lead us in the pledge?
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Commissioner Morgan.
You're welcome.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to item 1, which is the approval of the minutes for July 20th, 2021. Any comments from the commission or a motion?
I make a motion through the chair to approve the minutes of July 20th.
Thank you. Do we have
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Pamela, roll call vote, please.
Chair Biasotti?
Aye.
Vice Chair Harmon?
Aye.
Commissioner Durazo?
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
Commissioner Lethen? Commissioner Madden?
Aye.
Commissioner Morgan?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to item 2, which is public comments for items not on the agenda. For Zoom users, please raise your hand button, and for those on the phone, please star 9 if you'd like to address the commission for items that are not on the agenda this evening. And Madeline, do we have anyone looking for us?
We do not have any hands up at the moment, Chair.
Okay. Then we'll move to conflicts of interest. Item 3. Commissioner Harmon?
I am conflicted out of the entire Bay Hill planning process due to being married to a employee of the Alphabet Corporation. So I will be absent for both 4A and 4B, I believe.
Very good.
The same here. I'd be absent on account of it's within the 1,000-foot limit.
Thank you, both of you commissioners. All right, at this point, we'll hold for just a second and give Kelly a chance to join us. Madeline, any sign of Kelly yet?
Kelly's here.
Oh, she's popped back into the room. Kelly's
I'm
there.
here. Yes, I'm here. I had to reboot everything, and
There you go.
now you can see me.
Hi, Kelly.
Leave the meeting.
Hi.
Marching officials.
All right, so with that, we'll move.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair Biasotti, I apologize, but the 2 conflicted commissioners need to leave the meeting.
Okay,
by
that's
turning off their audio and video and disconnecting from the meeting. Or as Pamela said, anyway. Yeah, they can become attendees if they wish.
very good. Okay, are we set to go? I can't quite see everyone.
Not yet. I need to move Commissioner Morgan.
Madeline, I think you lost Mary Lou, Commissioner Johnson. We need to bring her back in.
Yeah.
There we go.
Oh, no, she's there. Okay, Chair, I believe we are ready to go.
Okay. So we are at item 4, conduct of business, and we have 2 items. Number 1 is item 4A, which is to adopt a resolution recommending City Council to certify the final Bay Hill specific plan and Phase 1 Environmental Impact Report, approve the general plan amendments, adopt the Bay Hill specific plan, and approve the proposed zoning ordinance amendments to add Chapter 12-290 Bay Hill specific plan districts, and 4B, to adopt a resolution recommending City Council to approve the vesting tentative map architectural review permit for the proposed U2's Phase 1 development and draft development agreement. And for the staff report, we'll turn it over to our city manager, Javon Brogan. Javon, good evening. Welcome to the meeting.
Thank you. Honorable Chair Biasotti, planning commissioners, members of the public, both those watching on Zoom, YouTube, and Channel 1. My name is Javon Brogan, and I have the distinct pleasure of being the city manager for the city of San Bruno. And it's also my pleasure to kick off tonight's presentation. We are here tonight for the first of 3 planned public meetings with regard to the Bay Hill specific plan and YouTube's Phase 1 development. And as Chair Biasotti mentioned, that is item 4A, a resolution recommending the certification of the final Bay Hill specific plan and other actions to the City Council. And 4B, a resolution approving of the vesting tentative map and other related actions for YouTube's Phase 1 development. The organization of tonight's presentation is that it is one presentation on the Bay Hill specific plan and YouTube Phase 1. Staff has planned, staff and our consultant team has planned about 45 minutes for the presentation, followed by the applicant, the Google YouTube Corporation, with 15 minutes. And so with that, why don't I take us through our agenda for tonight before turning over the presentation to our Community and Economic Development Director. So our agenda for tonight is we will go through the objective of our presentation that I've highlighted just now, but you'll see it written out. I'll introduce our Bay Hill specific plan team. We'll go through the background of the Bay Hill specific plan and what was the catalyst for what brings us here tonight. We will give a presentation on core aspects of the Final EIR, the Environmental Impact Report. We will talk about the general plan amendments that are necessary for the specific plan. We will go into detail about the specific plan, and all of you guys have received a copy of that. It is on our website, along with all the other related documents. We will talk about our zoning ordinance and zoning map amendments that are needed. We will then talk about the Phase 1 development project and the vesting tentative map. Next, number 9, we will talk about the development agreement. It's important to note that that development agreement covers Phase 1, as well as the other 4 phases to Phase 5 for YouTube's planned campus expansion. It is also important to note, just as ground setting, that that development agreement is between the city and Google and YouTube for the parcels that YouTube owns. It is not relating to the other privately owned parcels within the specific plan, and I know we'll talk a little bit about that. Finally, we will have the recommendations from staff, next steps, and of course, questions. Our objective for tonight is, again, to hold a public hearing. I won't go through and read all of this, but it is those 2 actions that we mentioned, 4A relating to the Bay Hill specific plan, and 4B relating to Phase 1 of YouTube's planned campus build out. A little bit of an introduction of our team. So all of these individuals are available tonight for any questions that the committee may have. So myself, the city manager, Mark Zaffarano, our city attorney, Pamela Wu, our community and economic development director, Matthew Newbaumer, the associate planner, but the principal planner on this effort, and deserves so much credit for all the hard work that went into everything that is before you tonight. Kaywan Ritchie, our interim public works director, and Joanna Kwok, our associate civil engineer for the project. Next, we have a subset, mind you, a subset of the larger consultant team that worked 4+ years on this project to bring it before you tonight. So there's Ed Schaefer from Burke, William, and Sorensen. He is a expert legal consultant that advised on the development agreement as well as other components of the specific plan. Heidi Mickelson, our environmental impact consultant from ICF. Elaine Costello from Management Partners, who served in a co-project management role alongside Dan Marks from Management Partners. We have Patrick O'Keefe, also from Management Partners, that supported our development agreement negotiations and came on later on in the project. He is here tonight as well as a resource to the commission. Taylor McAdam from Barron Piers, our transportation consultant, should you have any transportation related questions that staff cannot answer. And Terry Bottomley from Bottomley Design and Planning, our urban design consultant. And lastly, Jason Moody from EPS, Economic Planning Systems, our economic consultant on the project. So with that, I may proffer some additional comments as needed through the night, but I'd like to turn it over to our esteemed Community and Economic Development Director, Pamela Wu, who will go through the bulk of the presentation.
Thank you, City Manager Rogan. Good evening, commissioners. I have the pleasure to present to you, as Jamal mentioned, this is really a true testament of a team effort. We wouldn't be here unless this is a true team effort. So I want to kind of let you know that I will be going through the majority of the presentation tonight with the assistance of other, and as Jamal mentioned, they're all available in the room for any questions that you may have later on. So let's start with the presentation tonight. We'll start with the background. How do we get to where we are today? Back in May of 2017, YouTube approached the city in proposing to build additional office buildings in the Bay Hill Office Center, which necessitated a need to provide a comprehensive guidance for the entire 92 acres of land for Google YouTube's their growth in the next 20 years. As the planned area sits in the center of several major transportation hubs adjacent to BART Station, Caltrans, Interstate 280, 380, major roadways such as San Bruno, El Camino, this specific plan will provide a regulatory framework for properties within the 92 acres. As I mentioned previously, the planned area is bounded by such big boundaries that totals about 92 acres. You're familiar with the aerial photo that shows to the west, looking from El Camino with this gentle slope going upwards toward the mountains. And the Bay Hill specific plan will also provide provide guidance for future development. And since the Bay Hill Office Center has been an employment hub for the city since the 1970s, this really is a way for the city to modernize the next 20 years. Through the specific plan, this will allow a total of 2.46 million square feet of new additional regional office development. Will also maintain the Bay Hill Shopping Center and accommodate additional new expanded hotel uses. The overlay would also allow approximately 573 multi-family housing, in addition to establishing design standards that will shape and enhance public realm and also provides for transportation and infrastructure improvement. Part of the specific plan effort we'll talk about later also includes general plan amendment, creating a new zoning district to provide that consistency. This is a snapshot of how we get to where we are today. As I mentioned, this effort started in May into 2017, and you'll remember in between summer of 2017 to 2018, there were a number of public meetings, workshops, visioning statements. It really took a lot of the community's input and with council's direction to get to where we are today. In October of 2018, council held the first City Council and Planning Commission joint study session where there were a number of alternatives presented in the EIR. And then in December of 2018, council also selected the specific plan preferred alternative for staff to look further into. In July of 2019, and then fast forward, COVID hit us, but we did not stop the work. If you remember in July of 2020, City Council considered a formulaic community benefit approach to be implemented in the specific plan. Fast forward to this year, earlier this year in January, city staff released both the draft specific plan and the draft EIR, where the Planning Commission took public comments in February, where there were 11 written comments in addition to 6 verbal comments that were presented that took us to the final preparation of the final EIR. Subsequently, the project went to ALUC for review, and you'll remember just several weeks ago, we launched a virtual education room. We are where we are today, August, and the next step after us will be for City Council final adoption. Next, we'll talk a little bit about the high-level final EIR that was prepared for the specific plan and the Phase 1 project. The final EIR the final EIR includes the draft EIR and also all the comments that were accepted and responded to. The draft EIR was publicly released in January for 45 days, complying with the state guidance, and also provides a program level analysis for the Bay Hill specific plan, in addition to the project level analysis of Phase 1. What does that really mean? That means for the overall 92 acres, we look at as a conceptual program level evaluation. But concurrent with that project was the Phase 1 development, where more detailed analysis were conducted, where mitigations were addressed to bring the significant impact down to less significant impact level. The final EIR also evaluate the maximum office scenario versus the maximum housing scenario, where it provides analysis if there's no housing provided on site. The specific plan can yield approximately 4 million square feet of a new office, where if housing was provided, you're looking at about 3.5 million, without any changes to the existing retail spaces or hotel uses. The difference, of course, will be additional 573 multifamily housing if the housing scenario is selected. In the final EIR, there are also alternatives that talks about the no project. That's basically you do nothing, as is, no development alternative, and also the residential alternative, which is also equivalent to what we call an environmental superior alternative. Again, these are alternatives that council has weighed in to be included in the final EIR. And lastly, there was an increased height alternative. In the city of San Bruno, there is Ordinance 1284, which governs the overall height and also number of stories for any development. In the scenario that was studied in the EIR, if the height was to increase, that would require voter initiative and approval, which will yield additional square footage. Without going into too much technical terms, I'm going to turn it over to the ICF consultant, Heidi Mackelson, to go over the rest of the EIR slides.
Great, thank you, Pamela. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. Good evening, Chair Biasotti and Commissioners. As Pamela mentioned, my name is Heidi Mackelson. I'm the EIR consultant with ICF. In the next couple of slides, I will be presenting you with a brief summary of the impact conclusions in the EIR analysis, the comments received on the draft EIR, and the contents of the final EIR. Starting here with the impact conclusions in the EIR analysis, I'll provide just a brief overview of kind of what the levels of impact are under CEQA. There's 4 levels of environmental impact established under CEQA. Level 1 is no impact, where there would be no impact on the environment. Level 2 is less than significant, where an impact would occur, but it would not exceed what CEQA refers to as the threshold of significance. Level 3 is less than significant with mitigation, which is where a significant impact is identified, but it's mitigated to a less than significant level with mitigation measures that are included in the EIR. And level 4 is significant and unavoidable. This is a term that is established by CEQA, and it refers to a significant impact that remains significant even after the application of mitigation measures. So when an agency decides whether to certify an EIR and approve a project, they generally focus on the level 3 and the level 4 impacts, which we have summarized for you here. So starting with level 3, as you can see in the case of the specific plan and the Phase 1 development, several impacts were determined to be less than significant with mitigation, and these include impacts on air quality, energy, greenhouse gas emissions, hydrology and water quality, and noise. Other impacts that were found to be less than significant with mitigation that are not listed here include utilities and service systems, and in the case of the Phase 1 development, transportation. Next slide, please. Impacts that were determined to be significant and unavoidable are shown here. These include air quality impacts that are specific to what we refer to as criteria air pollutants and toxic air contaminants. Just to provide a bit of background for folks on these terms, criteria air pollutants are 6 common air pollutants that are regulated under the Clean Air Act. And toxic air contaminants are localized pollutants. They're not regulated in the same way as criteria air pollutants, but they can cause health effects on sensitive receptors. An example is diesel particulate matter. It's important to note that the EIR does include mitigation measures that could mitigate these impacts to a less than significant level. These include measures that would require developers to pay offset fees for criteria air pollutant emissions that exceed emission standards, and a measure that requires the preparation of project-specific health risk assessments for projects that would emit toxic air contaminants within 1,000 feet of sensitive receptors. If these mitigation measures are successfully implemented by future projects, these impacts could be reduced to a less than significant level. But because we don't know at this time and with certainty whether offset programs would be available in the future and whether health risk assessments would be able to fully mitigate the impacts of any individual project, the EIR conservatively concludes that these impacts would remain significant and unavoidable. The EIR, with regard to the last bullet here, the EIR also concludes that transportation impacts associated with vehicle miles traveled would be significant and unavoidable for the specific plan. And this is even with implementation of a mitigation measure that requires tenants to implement transportation demand management programs, or TDM. Essentially, in order to have a less than significant VMT impact, a TDM program would need to achieve a 43% drive alone rate. And while this could be possible for some tenants, including YouTube, which does have a very robust TDM program, the EIR recognizes that not all tenants would be able to achieve this level of trip reduction, hence the significant and unavoidable conclusion for the specific plan. There were no significant and unavoidable impacts identified for the Phase 1 development, which means that all impacts would be less than significant or less than significant with mitigation. And the last bullet here notes that when an agency approves a project that would result in significant and unavoidable impacts, CEQA does require that agency to adopt what is called a statement of overriding considerations. The draft SOC is included in your agenda package, and it describes the reasons for approving the project despite its significant environmental effects. These can generally include economic and policy considerations such as job creation and housing development. Next slide, please. Moving on to the contents of the final EIR. The final EIR includes responses to the comments that were received on the draft EIR. The city received a total of 11 comment letters on the draft EIR. These include 4 comment letters from public agencies, including the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, Caltrans District 4, the SFO, and the San Francisco PUC, Public Utilities Commission. We also received comment letters from 2 organizations, including the Sierra Club and YouTube. YouTube submitted 3 separate comment letters, and YouTube's comments comprised the majority of the comments received on the draft EIR. We also received comments either in writing or verbally at the February 16th Planning Commission hearing from 9 individuals. The final EIR includes written responses to all of these comments in Chapter 3 of the final EIR. Revisions were also made to the draft EIR in response to the comments or as staff-initiated changes. Those are all included in Chapter 4 of the final EIR. All of the revisions that were made to the draft EIR clarified or amplified the draft EIR analysis, and the revisions did not change the conclusions of the draft EIR and do not require recirculation under CEQA. I'll also note here that the final EIR also includes as an appendix an addendum to the water supply assessment that was prepared for the project and included in the draft EIR. We didn't receive any comments on the draft EIR's water supply analysis, but the water supply assessment addendum was prepared at the request of city staff in recognition of the fact that the statewide water landscape, as I'm sure we all well know, has changed quite notably since the original water supply assessment was prepared for the project in 2019. The WSA addendum, which is based on the city's draft 2020 Urban Water Management Plan, which is scheduled for approval later this year, confirms the findings of the original water supply assessment, specifically that sufficient water supplies would be available to serve the project, including during multiple dry year conditions. Lastly, the agenda packet also includes the required findings under CEQA and the final mitigation monitoring and reporting program, which lists the final mitigation measures required for the specific plan and the phase 1 development in the EIR. And with that, I will hand the presentation back over to Pamela.
Thank you, Heidi. So next we'll talk a little bit about general plan amendments. You may wonder why we're amending our general plan if the specific plan is not consistent with it. I should remind you that our general plan was last updated in 2009. As I mentioned earlier, this effort to do a comprehensive guidance for the future development of the Bay Hill specific plan area came in 2017. In the planning world, we want to provide consistency from the guiding document, which is the general plan, to the specific plan and the zoning ordinance. By introducing the new specific plan, we realize the general plan will be out of turn and become inconsistent since we're introducing two new land use designations that will be the Bay Hill Regional Office and also the Bay Hill Neighborhood Commercial Land Use Districts. And also there will be allowing housing in the housing residential overlay, as this was not previously stated in a general plan. So really the general plan amendment that's part of the packet or the approval is a text amendment to provide that consistency of all the relevant city planning documents. Next, we'll go into the high level of the different chapters of the Bay Hill specific plans. Again, as I mentioned, this really is a community effort where everyone has put in their vision of how the specific plan should be shaped out. The specific plan is based on the visioning statement and the guiding principle, and every chapter that was developed is based on these thoughts to promote a vibrant and mixed-use walkable district, to enhance the public realm and promote quality design, so that we'll have a multimodal mobility. We'll talk more about what that really is, to foster a housing development, if that's a possibility, and to integrate Bay Hill with the greater San Bruno community, to provide amenities such as the Cherry Plaza, and also to ensure that the city receives positive physical benefits from the overall development. And in general, the specific plan will provide an optimal long-term development patterns. As I mentioned, I have a strong team behind me to bring you this project. With that said, I am going to turn the rest of the specific plan overview to Elaine Costello to give you a more detailed presentation. Elaine?
Hi, thank you, Pamela, and thank you, members of the commission and chair of the commission. So the specific plan document, which the members of the commission have, has 7 chapters and an appendix. And I'm going to focus on the major policy directions within that document by starting with land use. And Pamela has already mentioned, you know what, next slide, thank you. She has already mentioned that the plan will permit 2.46 million square feet of additional regional office development allocated on a parcel by parcel basis. And the reason that we, and when I use the term we, I just want to reiterate that I am speaking for our team. We gave a lot of thought to this. We really analyzed whether this amount of development could be accommodated successfully. And we realized, especially given the plan area has excellent access to regional road transportation and transit, both BART and Caltrain, which is extremely unusual to have both of those available. And of course, YouTube's interest in creating a campus and their, very strong record of having very robust efforts to minimize people coming to work in single occupancy vehicles, we reached the conclusion that Bay Hill is a good location for redevelopment with new office buildings. And so if we look at the next slide, you can see that light orange color is the, is that new land use designation of Bay Hill Regional Office. And, I just want to point out those, you see the little gray markings? Those are the buildings, but a lot of the development most of the development that we're talking about is going to happen by taking the existing surface parking lot, putting the parking underground and building on those parking lots. There will be removal of existing buildings, but it's really going to be a way to use parking lots to create more office development so close to transit. So in addition to, while we're still on this map, I'm just going to point out that Pamela also mentioned the residential. And, and she also pointed out, and I want to just reiterate that one of the big breakthroughs with this plan was allowing residential, because it became clear in the public meetings that that was something that the public had wanted as an option on this site. So the plan allows a total of 573 units. Some of them are allowed on the 210 of them on the as a mixed use on the shopping center. And that mixed use has to take place without reducing the amount of commercial square footage. We heard loud and clear that maintaining the existing shopping center commercial square footage was very important to the community. So we made sure that that's a policy in the plan, but we also allow for residential to be built on the site as a part of a redevelopment of the project at some time in the future over the 20 years that the plan will be in effect. And so there's some housing there. And then along San Bruno Avenue at 801, 851 Traeger, you may not know, but they're basically on both sides of Traeger Avenue along San Bruno Avenue. There's also another residential overlay, which would allow another 363 housing units to be developed. So we have we felt that the focus in the plan was to put residential near existing residential, so that when people would move into this area, they would be close to services, they would be close to another neighborhood, they wouldn't be isolated in an office park. So then that was our approach. The other thing that we felt was really important was to keep the existing, as you know, there is a hotel on this site close to the El Camino. And we keep that as a permitted use, but we also allow additional hotels. And in fact, we built some flexibility into the plan. 20 years is a long time. And so, for example, one of the areas of flexibility is we have about 181,000 square feet of unallocated square footage, which is prioritized for hotel and retail uses. So it allows flexibility over time to be able to come in and do some additional hotels and additional retail. And another piece of flexibility is for the office. We allow pretty limited, but we have it there, a transfer of development program. So that, if at some point a property owner discovers, well, I'd really like to have a little less on this site and a little more on that site, we've built that in, so we don't have to the city doesn't have to come back and amend the plan for small changes. So we tried to be looking at what works today, but also what will work in the future in terms of land use. So we can move on to the urban design slides, because I've covered those two. Yeah. And if we could go to the next slide, that would be great. The one that shows a picture. Okay. So one of the things with adding this much square footage, and really the goal, how do we keep people out of their single occupancy vehicles? And how do we keep this from becoming auto-oriented? We're putting the parking underground, but one of the things we really wanted to do, and we knew it was important to the community, was to create a very walkable Bay Hills area, so that people would, tree-lined streets, streets designed to be interconnected with public spaces, and street trees, buffered sidewalks, frontage landscape, pedestrian-oriented lighting, and particularly one of the things, can we go back to the previous slide for a second? The picture of the enhanced, thank you. If you look on Bay Hill and Traeger and Elm, you see this sort of thicker green lines. That's a greenway, which would be a continuous, publicly accessible, privately owned and maintained linear open space. So that not only would we have these streets with great street trees and just really meant to be places that you want to walk instead of getting in your car, but we'd have these areas with greenways where there'd be even more amenities for the public. The other thing, and you'll see it on this slide, is that and you'll hear more about it when we get into phase one, but we also wanted some public open spaces that were larger. So we have the Cherry Avenue Plaza up on the corner of Cherry and Grundy, which will now be redesigned and publicly accessible. And then there are, and you'll see this in phase one, private open spaces where property owners can have their own employees, have, lovely places to be outside as well, interior courtyards. And the final thing, so there's a lot of emphasis on the public realm and making it attractive to, in terms of urban design, especially to pedestrians. We'll get into bikes a little later because we're also focused on them. And then we have a number of policies about building orientation and design that are, because it's going to be a lot of new building and we want to make sure, our focus was how do we allow this much office and make sure that it's very successful for the community. So we incorporated a lot of well thought out policies to reduce the impact of long buildings, for example, to vary building massing, to have street facing entrances. And if we go to the next slide, you'll sort of see quickly, I don't want to, but you see this is, the first one shows you what we think, what the policies would lead to in terms of regional office environment. The second one about what it would look like on the mixed use in front of the shopping center. And the third, what it will look like on the residential environment with a real emphasis on landscape edges and building entrances and a lot of landscaping and a lot of street trees. So the next thing in terms of urban design, I just want to show you the next slide. Because again, it shows you how different the streets will look as they're built out. They'll be, for a typical frontage, which is, we'll have a 30-foot average, city will have a 30-foot average setback. We wanted to be flexible. So there are some areas where it would be just 10 feet just to provide some design flexibility. But you'll always have an enhanced pedestrian environment, the curbside planters, the lighting, the street trees. It will be quite different from the way it looks today. And then on those streets that we talked about earlier with greenways, we have 30 to 60-foot expanded open space areas with enhanced landscaping and pedestrian amenities. We built in, at the request of YouTube, some flexibility about the exact width, but always with the focus that it's usable to the public. So we think those will help meet the goals and meet the objectives that were set up by the community, and particularly encourage walking and discourage use of single occupancy vehicles. So our next slide is the access chapter. And in this, we really get further into the idea of how do we encourage bicycles and bicycle and pedestrian, but also how do we make sure that the movement of traffic, of cars, there will still be cars, and how do we make sure that that movement moves, the cars move smoothly, that everyone, pedestrian, bicyclist, and automobile is safe and comfortable. So there are a number of, this shows kind of it's a little harder. I'm just kind of showing you this. This is kind of the big picture of where we're making enhancements. We're adding bicycle facilities, enhanced bicycle facilities on basically all the roads. enhance pedestrian crossings and sidewalks so it's safer and more comfortable to walk, but also level of the surface improvements. You can see we're signalized intersections like Traeger Avenue, and we're adding turn pockets. The plan goes into this in detail, but I want to give you that big picture that we're trying to address a really different ways that people can travel, but encouraging alternatives to the car, but also recognizing that we will have the auto and that we want to make sure that the cars move smoothly. And so the next slide is, okay, so one of the things that YouTube has been very successful at their bus shuttle program. So we did incorporate in the plan a new multimodal facility between Bay Hill and Grundy that will accommodate the YouTube buses and keep them off city streets. They won't be minimize the amount of loading and unloading on city streets. And so we also, in terms of parking, as I said, we have this kind of goal of getting into other kind of modes of travel, but mostly we don't want people parking in neighborhoods. So we have added, if we go to the slide on access, just a couple more down, yeah, they're right there. We ensure consistency with the city loading and parking standards for both vehicular and bicycle parking. And the next slide is, okay, so one of the other things, it's all great to do, we've given a lot of careful thought to all the things the carrots to encourage people to use alternatives to the car, but we are also using some regulations to really require the alternatives to the single occupancy vehicle. And I'm not gonna, Pamela had mentioned that, so we're gonna have a transportation demand management program that's a requirement. It's a state law requirement, and it's a key objective to reduce vehicle usage. And the primary goal is to shift drive-alone vehicles to other modes, carpools, shuttles, transit, bicycles, walking. So as a result, each property owner will be required to implement measures that get to the equivalent of less than 43% of new trips occurring by single occupancy vehicles. And that whole program will be carefully monitored. And if property owners don't meet it, they will be required to make mitigation payments. So this is a combination of trying to create a physical environment that encourages bicycling, walking, and discourages single occupancy vehicle, but make sure those cars flow smoothly, but also sort of says we need to really make this happen because it's important to the community to not have a lot more cars on the roads. And again, a big advantage of doing a specific plan, if we can go to the infrastructure slides, a big advantage of doing a specific plan is that you look very carefully at making sure that all the services and facilities and infrastructure improvements that are needed to service the development will be provided, either by the developer doing it themselves or by the city doing capital improvements with the developer paying for their fair share of those improvements. And this was something that was worked on very carefully by a very large team. If we can go to the next slide. We spent a lot of time looking extremely carefully at water supply, wastewater improvements, stormwater. For example, in this plan under stormwater, we have a requirement that projects demonstrate no net increase in stormwater discharge to the public system. So we have a pretty rigorous approach to infrastructure. Dry utilities, parks and recreation, publicly accessible, privately owned open space, police protection, fire protection, libraries, schools. We looked at all of these and made sure that they will be adequate for the project and for the build out that's allowed in the specific plan area. and that if there are enhancements that need to be made, they are made either by the private developer or the private developer pays their fair share of that. And I'll get into a little bit more in implementation of how that will be paid for. In environmental quality, Heidi Meckelson has already talked about, we had an EIR, very careful EIR done, and we took a number of the policies of that EIR and actually put them in the plan, and they're shown with a little asterisk in the plan. And they cover things like noise, hazardous materials, air quality, greenhouse gases, archaeology, geology. I'm not going to go through each of them, but what I want to sort of give us an overview is how carefully this team worked to make sure that the environmental quality, Bay Hill's environmental quality, will be enhanced through this new development. And then, okay, so one of the really important things in a specific plan, which is really unique to this type of plan, is the focus on implementation. Making sure, as I said earlier, that necessary public infrastructure, amenities, and services are provided as new development occurs over time, and the development pays the full cost of the improvements and services that they require and will be using. So, for example, if we can go to the next slide. In the staff report, we did establish infrastructure and service costs very carefully with a large team of folks, including access and connectivity projects, water supply, stormwater, that these projects that we're listing here are actually the public improvements that there are going to have to be some public improvements to city water supplies, but we want to make sure that the properties in the Bay Hill specific plan area pay for their share of those enhanced public facilities. And so to do that, to implement that, the plan establishes an area development impact fee program, and that makes sure that as each project comes along, it pays its share. We've laid out what that share is. We do require that the property owners do their own public right-of-way maintenance, that will not be a city obligation. They will do that. And that we have also identified where facility dedications and easements need to be done. The next slide talks about something that's really unusual in a specific plan and very beneficial, we think. And last July, it was July of 2020, the council approved the incorporation in the specific plan of a community benefit program. And that community benefit program, everything I've been talking about right up until now and our whole team has been working on, are services and facilities that will be needed by the development in the plan. The community benefit program is different. It says this project will have large impacts on the rest of the community. We want to make sure it has a large benefit on the rest of the community, and it creates funds that can be used to provide community benefits outside of what's needed just to serve the project. Very different. So each office use will pay $35 per square foot of gross building space above what's allowed by the current zoning. And in this project, that is about 1.9 million square feet of development that will be paying this $35 per square foot, which is a total of about $67 million that will be coming in over time to benefit for the community to use for community-wide benefits. There are some exemptions that for small projects and for affordable housing, and the cost for housing is less, and offices, retail and hotel don't pay into this community benefit program because they have other community benefits. And the developer does receive credit for the payments toward cost of preparing a specific plan in EIR, because there are great community benefits to having approached the way to regulate development in the Bay Hill specific plan through a specific plan, in the Bay Hill specific plan area through a specific plan. And the whole team that worked on each of these chapters is here, members or representatives are here tonight. So when we get to the question and answer period, you can ask more questions with that about this. But with that, I'm going to turn it back to Pamela.
Thank you, Elaine. So next we'll talk a little bit about zoning ordinance. With 11 chapters that are laid out in Bayhill specific plan, there's not one chapter in the current zoning code where it encapsulates all of the development standards, the regulations, the regulatory framework for this 90 acres of the planned area. So what we did is staff proposed to amend and add a new chapter to our zoning ordinance, will be 12.290, called the Bayhill Specific Plan District. So that will ensure that the Bayhill Specific Plan is developed in a comprehensive and planned manner, and also is compatible with the adjacent uses. The Bayhill Specific Plan, if you will, is looking at a more conceptual, programmatic approach where the zoning district will really dial that and translate into development standards, setbacks, heights, regulations, parking, and whatnot. We also introduced 4 zoning districts of the Bayhill Regional Office, BRO, Bayhill Neighborhood Commercial, BNC, in addition to 2 residential overlay, the BR, Bayhill Residential, and also Bayhill Mixed Use. Also, the part of the specific plan zoning ordinance addresses the allocation of new development and transfer of development. If you drive by the 92 acres right now, you'll see a lot of existing buildings. So how do we credit those existing square footage to the new development that's addressed under the allocation section? And also, as I mentioned, we have specific standards that talks about setback, high lot coverage, minimal setback, landscaping, if you will. And this really is to provide an overall comprehensive regulation that creates a cohesive design for the entire 92 acres. As I mentioned earlier, maybe I haven't, but YouTube owns the majority of the 92 acres, but not everyone is part of, not every property. So by having the zoning standard in place, this will ensure future developers or other property owners to also adhere to these guidelines. What's unusual about the process that city team undertook is that concurrently with the preparation of a specific plan, the YouTube team has been working on what we call the phase 1 development. So the phase 1 development is really to realize the guidelines and the standards that's been discussed and prepared in the Bayhill specific plan, translate that to the real action to a construction project. So the phase 1 development, we call it, will include 2 3-story office buildings totaling about 440,000 square feet of new office and 3 levels of subterranean parking. Total parking that will be provided is approximately a little shy of 1,900 spaces, and this will replace the existing parking spaces on 901,000 Cherry at a 1-to-1 ratio, and all of the new office development will comply with the current parking standard to provide 3 spaces for each 1,000 new net office spaces. As it's allowed in the recently amended parking design chapter, Google has proposed to use a combination of standard spaces, tandem parking, in addition to mechanical parking. This is an aerial rendering showing the phase 1 development from Cherry Avenue to your left on the picture, and then with a realigned Grundy. So what I also want to talk about is phase 1 is not just about building 2 big offices. We're also talking about realigning the Grundy Road, so it's being straightened. And we're also talking about creating this multimodal that Elaine and also Heidi talked about, to have a hub for all the Google buses and other modes of transportation to come in. So as part of phase 1 project, this multimodal hub will also be improved. In addition to a publicly accessible but privately owned space called the Cherry Plaza at the northeastern corner of Cherry Avenue and Grundy. So this will provide additional public ground space for the neighborhood to enjoy. And in order to have all of these realized, unfortunately, the buildings that the Lake Building, 1150 and 1250 Bayhill, they will be coming down, demolished for temporary parking. So the renderings, again, it's kind of a artist rendering to show what the Cherry Plaza may look like once it's built. Again, a rendering looking down on a realigned Grundy Lane with both buildings on your right and left. As Google has envisioned, there's a lot of greenery, a lot of landscaping, and a lot of people walking, different modes of transportation, bikes and vehicles, all happening at the same time. Part of the Bay Hill specific plan policy addresses street trees and median tree. As we are working with the YouTube team, we were reviewing the Bay Hill specific phase 1 project and realized that there are street trees that are not quite planted in accordance to the specific plan policy and urban design guideline. So through tonight's recommendation, not only staff is asking the Planning Commission to adopt resolution to approve the project, we're also asking the Planning Commission to approve the condition that has been included in the resolution to add street trees so they are 20 feet on center. So right now, there's some areas that have been proposed in the specific, in the phase 1 plan that does not have that exact street planting. So again, as we recommend, that's also one of the conditions that's included in the resolution. Part of the phase 1 effort to realign Grundy Lane, YouTube has also proposed to do a vesting tentative. In addition to realign and straighten Grundy Lane, this will also readjust the boundaries affecting only the Google-owned properties and without creating additional properties. So essentially, they're realigning, readjusting boundaries so that there's more room to provide additional setbacks and parking, if you will. And also, in addition to that, they will be abandoning a portion on the Elm Avenue because of the multimodal hub that's going in. In your packet, many of the links is the vesting tentative map. If you're an engineer, architect by trade, you'll be fascinated with the amount of information that's being shown on the tentative map. So this is a current configuration of the plant area. You'll see Grundy Lane is kind of in the weedy section. So the intent is through the vesting tentative map by recordation of a final map of Grundy Lane, that'll be the wiggly roadway onto the top of the picture will be realigned and straightened. We talked a little bit about development agreement, and City Manager Grogan also mentioned that this is an agreement between the city and Google YouTube. This is a voluntary gesture between the developer and the city. And why do you do that? The purpose is to secure these rights within a specific time frame that's documented development agreement so that all of the regulatory guidance, as mentioned, are locked in. So this is an exhibit that's part of the development agreement document that talks about the phases, if you will, the lots of how Google envisioned to complete their overall growth in the next 20 years. So if you look at on the map, Lot 1N and Lot 1S is what we typically refer to as phase 1 development. Together and follow that by Lot 2, which is immediately to the east of Lot 1S. And then to the south of Lot 2 is another bigger property of Lot 3 with Lot 4 bordering Highway 380 to the north of the picture, and the remaining 3 individuals that are Lot 5N, 5E, and 5S's. This development agreement covers what we call all 5 phases and also 5 lots. The term will carry an initial 15 years if Google can provide initial payment of $56.2 million. That will be all of the impact fee, community benefits, area impact fee for phase 1 with the prepayment option of phase 2 at the time of the first building permit. Within 15 years, if Google is able to finish the construction for phase 1 through 3, the development agreement allows for an automatic extension of 5 additional years to carry the entire development agreement to a total of 20 years. So again, why do you do a DA? This is a way for the developer to lock in and to also have their development rights vested per the specific plan, the zoning, the tentative plan, the architectural review. And also it gives the developer a protection of what if the local regulations change after you get your initial entitlement. This will be protected from future changes of the local regulation. And then the project will also not be subject to any sort of moratorium, referendum during the development agreement term. So in return, that's where the community benefit, development agreement, in terms of financial benefit that the city will receive. So the fees that we talked about includes community benefit, citywide development impact fee, that's per the city development impact fee ordinance, an area development impact fee that is specific to this area. And then the fees are also subject to annual inflation increase. And also the developer may choose to prepay all of the phases at one time or at the time when the construction comes in. As Elaine mentioned earlier, it was documented in the specific plan implementation chapter that the developer will receive approximately 75% of the overall cost for this project for the preparation of for the general plan and amendment, and that has also been memorialized in the development agreement. There are other areas of the development agreement. It's a big document that's been included in your staff report. If you have any other questions, we also have the legal consultant who can answer any more questions that you may have. That brings us to the recommendation for tonight's action. As we mentioned earlier, you have two items before you where your staff recommends you to take two separate actions to adopt a resolution. For item 4A, we're recommending you to adopt a resolution to recommend approval to City Council, certifying the final EIR, approving the amendment to general plan, adopt the Bay Hill specific plan, adopt the zoning ordinance and the zoning map amendment to chapter 12.290, and also to adopt a resolution for item 4B to recommend to City Council to approve a vesting tentative map, an architectural review for the phase 1 development with the condition adding additional street trees, and also to add the development agreement. One amendment to our recommendation is that we just realized that in the conditions of approval, Exhibit A to the resolution for phase 1 development, staff has made a reference to a high-low street tree installation, which we recommend that to be deleted since there has been more communication between the city team and the Bay Hill team since the preparation of staff report. Lastly, I would like to point out that since the preparation of staff reports today, I have received 3 letters in support of the project. The first letter was received from Leslie Padamia, part of the San Bruno Community Foundation, in full support. I have forwarded the letter to the Planning Commission. If you like, I'll be more than happy to read it, let me know. And also a second letter from the Regency Centers representing the Bay Hill Shopping Center, also in full support of the Bay Hill specific plan. And also encourage the Planning Commission to recommend Council to adopt a specific plan and certify the EIR. I also understand that the Chamber of Commerce Chair, Kristen Quinn, is also in audience, and she has wrote to me just in case she cannot make it in person. She would like to also express her support for the project. After tonight, if a decision can be rendered, the project will be moved forward to the City Council for the following action. What's not in front of you tonight are the first action item to adopt a Bay Hill specific plan water supply assessment. This action alone only requires a council action, and that's why it's not in your resolution. Certifying the final EIR, approve the general plan amendment, approve the Bay Hill specific plan, approve zoning, approve vesting tentative map, architectural review, approve development agreement, is all part of the resolutions that you will be taking actions to that. The very last action, approve loading zone, as part of phase 1, has gone to TSPC for review and approval. Because it does not require any planning commission's action, this will be forwarded to City Council when City Council reviews the entire project. This concludes my presentation. Thank you for staying this long to listen to all of us. After my presentation, the YouTube team also has a presentation more specific to the phase 1 design. But if the Planning Commission has a question for city staff, we'll be more than happy to take that right now.
Thank you, Pamela. That was quite a presentation. Does anyone on our commission have a question for staff? Anyone? Okie doke. Why don't we?
I have a question.
Oh, please go ahead.
I wanted to see if the city staff can give me clarity or an articulation regarding the community benefits. What are those tangible benefits, or what would they be? I know it could be up to, it was $35 per square foot, total of possibly $67 million. I know that the community letter from the Community Foundation had echoed some of the community benefit. I don't know if those are the same thing, but I'm wondering if I can get just more clarity and more context of what those benefits are and will be.
Thank you, Commissioner Marco Durazo. Javon, Brogan City Manager, why don't I take the first piece of that? Let me begin by saying you mentioned community benefits and reference the dollar amount. I'll go there, but let me just step a little bit on the balcony to articulate overall community benefits. That is not, let's say, the negotiated community benefit formula. It's important to note that the structure of what we're talking about, the Bay Hill specific plan, while it began with a request from YouTube, the specific plan is very much a city document. It is city staff and consultants hired by the city that developed the guiding principles that were on slide 21, and that ensure in negotiations with YouTube for the parcels that they own, that those public benefits, the public realm, ensuring the improvements to infrastructure, ensuring the civic plazas, those sort of community benefits that may be privately owned, but still our community will enjoy, are part of this overall plan. And so I think that's sort of important to note. There are a number of community benefits built into the private improvements that are being made. Specific to the community benefit program, and that's that $35 per square foot for office, or $10 per square foot for residential. As was mentioned by, I believe, Elaine Costello, that a discretionary action like this, where we are providing additional development intensity to private property owners, gives the city the ability to include within that community benefits that extend beyond the project area. And so what we're talking about when we talk about the formulaic community benefit formula are dollars that the city will receive that they can allocate beyond the planning area. And so with regard to office, we did mention that it is approximately $67 million for the entire office square footage. What's before you in item 4B, which is the development agreement specific to YouTube, is that community benefit program for YouTube. They are the applicant, they are the partner, albeit with letters like the one that the director just read from the owner of the Bay Hill Shopping Center. Other owners are in support of it, but YouTube is the owner that we had before us that has requested the specific plan or requested additional entitlement and is moving forward with projects. And so we are in a position to have a development agreement with them for their parcels. And so the general formulaic community benefit package specific to YouTube is $56 million over the life of all 5 phases, or the 15, or if extended to 20-year development agreement. In addition, what was mentioned in the required prepayment for phases 1 and 2 is for phases, what's listed on Exhibit B, 1 north, 1 south, so that's phase 1. And then phase 2, there's a total of approximately $25 million of community benefits that the city would receive when the horizontal permit, the foundational permit for phase 1 is granted. We anticipate that will be sometime in 2022, so next year. So that community benefit for the U2 Park phase 1 and 2 of approximately 25 million we would receive in 2022. That money will be subject to allocation by the city council for benefits citywide. And so, as you know, as a community where unfortunately the need has far outstripped the resources for quite some time, 25 million is a lot of money, but when we look at all of our needs citywide, it doesn't come close to covering all of them. And so we will be, should this plan be approved, having conversations with the city council about where to allocate those dollars subsequently. And so it's also important to note that cities do not often have this opportunity where you're doing a specific plan and you have an entity that is going to, that has active plans to build out a project. Sometimes specific plans are done and you have a developer building the building on spec, or maybe multiple property owners where you do not have the ability to have such a significant community benefit and even a front loading of that community benefit sort of tied very much simultaneous to the approval of the specific plan. I hope that answers your question and maybe a little bit more.
Yes, thank you very much.
All right, do we have any other questions for staff?
I do, through the chair. I was just wondering really quickly, in one of the very first slides that Pamela presented, there was the mention of the max housing scenario and then an alternative, the residential alternative. And I was hoping staff could clarify the difference between those two.
So I think what you're referring to, and let's clarify, Kelly, or Commissioner Levine, what you're referring to is not actually the housing inventory, with regard to what's built into the specific plan, the housing overlay, right?
That's correct. Yes, it didn't occur to me that it seemed as though the max housing scenario was kind of a subsection of the specific plan, and then the residential alternative was a completely different alternative that had been posed for the EIR. But I just wanted to clarify these two things as I'm kind of quantifying the need for housing as I'm hearing the presentation.
So you're right. So there are two different things. So there is the residential overlay that's already being built into the specific plan. If the residential overlay is to be realized, the city could be looking at approximately 573 multi-family units. What you're also referring to is this environmental superior to residential alternative that's been evaluated in the final EIR. So what that means is that if they don't build that many square feet of offices and they increase beyond the 500 units that's been allowed in a specific plan, what would that do? It's kind of a requirement for the final EIR to have alternatives. As you remember, I talked about the timeline where City Council provided direction to the CEQA consultant on which alternative should be studied. They're looking at the same goal, but two different things. So there are residential overlay allowing a specific plan, but the residential alternative study in the final EIR was really at the infancy level, looking at the possibility. So the final EIR really did not address what if the Bayhill specific plan don't have that many square feet of office, but have a lot more housing. The same thing with kind of a height increase. What if a voter initiative was adopted to remove the 3-story and the 50 feet requirement? But the final EIR did not address any of these alternatives to say, what would that outcome be?
Now, when you go, Director Wu, to slide 59, the housing inventory, because I think that there was a part of Commissioner Levine's question that, Commissioner, I heard you say, in considering housing, one of the things that we did prepare, thinking that the question of overall housing in San Bruno may come up, is while there is a housing overlay within the Bay Hill specific plan of 578 units, I believe, 73 units, it's important to note that San Bruno does have plans to build housing elsewhere in the city. We do not currently have a job housing imbalance, but certainly there's a regional housing shortage, and certainly we have ABAG, Bay Area Association of Government, housing unit allocations. And so the slide that's before you just points out that there are a number of areas within the city where we have planned for additional housing growth. And probably the best place to start is our transit corridors plan, which was adopted by the city council some years ago and even ratified by voters, because this city actually increased density and height along its transit corridor near Barton, near Caltrain, near El Camino Real, and downtown. And so there is 1,610 units that is an existing allowable units within the transit corridors plan. In addition, recently, the community and the commission may know that the city put out a Reimagining San Fran pamphlet where we are articulating for 8,000 housing units on a revitalized San Fran. There's an approved Mills Park development of 429 units. There's the high school district looking at various ways to reuse Crestmore High, proposals of up to 200 single family homes. There is the Ingall site, a former school site where the San Bruno Park School District has a purchase and sale agreement with Pulte Homes, and they're currently working with the Community and Economic Development for 200 housing units. There's Glenview Terrace for 29 housing. There's the Skyline project, a total of 70 units, 40 single family homes that we know are completed and I think almost fully sold, and then 30 multi-family residential teacher housing units that have been entitled. And then a number of other projects, right? There's a 111 San Bruno Avenue and our Aperture project. But San Bruno does recognize that we do sit in California and in the region where housing is needed. And we have planned for and actually intensified housing availability throughout the city, and are also taking the further step of including the housing overlay as a part of this Bay Hill specific plan. And I think the letter from the Regency Shopping Centers that has a housing overlay on their parcel for 210 units sort of speaks to that acceptance of the need to build housing and property owners also agreeing with that.
Thank you. I appreciate that the context of the housing, the larger picture of the city. Yeah, that clarifies my questions for now. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any other commissioners that have questions for staff? Go ahead, Commissioner Madden.
Hi. Yeah. So still a little bit confused here. I believe, if I'm understanding right, there's two large payments, one of 67 million, another of 56 million. Is that correct?
Commissioner, that was a question about the development agreement, correct? So with the YouTube development agreement that is a part of the 4B action, there is an agreement that YouTube would prepay phase 2 when they pull the foundational permit for phase 1. And again, we expect that to happen sometime in 2022. The answer that we gave to Commissioner Durazo's question was the amount of that payment that would specifically be in the community benefits bucket, that $35 per square foot, and that is 25 million. The answer to your question is how much overall will be in that first payment for all of the fees due for phases 1 and 2. The answer to that question is 56 million. That includes the development impact fees, the affordable housing fees, or what we also call commercial linkage fees. I believe that amount just for affordable housing for phases 1 and 2 is 9 million. And that also includes the Bay Hill area diff. That area diff funds YouTube's portion of infrastructure requirement within the Bay Hill specific plan for phases 1 and 2. And so that entire sort of first payment is 56 million. 25 of that is community benefits, but then there are other payments that would be due for other phases. I guess a high level of that, I would refer you to Exhibit D as a part of the 4B package. It has a summary of the required payments from YouTube with respect to the development agreement. The total over the life of the 20-year DA, if they take the 5-year extension, is 130 million. And that's broken out in various columns. And so you'll see that the total community benefits over that entire cycle, all 5 phases, is 56 million. And again, 25 of that would be prepaid for phases 1 and 2. I hope that answered your question. If we need to clarify, we absolutely will.
Yeah, it's really difficult to follow along verbally without seeing it. Basically, the bottom line I have is, you had a slide up there earlier that showed how much it costs to, fix the streets and whatnot and make all those improvements. And you said they're going to pay their fair percentage of that. Who pays the remaining percentage of that? Is that all? I just want to make sure that we're not putting the city on the hook for stuff we can't afford when we already have a lot of other stuff we need to take care of. So from what I'm hearing, you're saying 130 million total will be paid. 25 million of that goes to the city for the council to decide how to use however they please, and the costs of public streets and things like that, or is that too simplified?
It's a high level simplification. There's one clarification of the 130 million, which is the entire fee amount for development impact fees, affordable housing fees. You said 25 of that is community benefits. That 25 is only for phases 1 and 2. The entire community benefit portion of that 130 million is 56 million. And that's clarified on Exhibit D. With regard to your question on who would pay the other required infrastructure money, it will be, if we're talking about the Bay Hill specific plan area, other property owners in the specific plan. If we're talking about the city's comprehensive development impact fees, it would be all developments across the city would pay into that for every project. That is something this city did. And I want to say 2018, we implemented development impact fees. So all development anywhere in the city would pay their fair share of infrastructure costs. And then just in regard to infrastructure, there's also required infrastructure that YouTube will put in and pay for as a direct mitigation to their project and the infrastructure to serve that project. So the city will not be burdened with that cost at all. And in addition, they're paying their fair share of development impact fees, as well as providing the overall community benefit package that can be allocated by the city council.
Am I wrong in remembering something about 30% is going to be paid for by this project? Did I hear that?
Commissioner Madden, are you talking about how much money is going to be credit back? Is it
you had a slide up there. I think there was 42 million in to the public areas or the streets, and you said, I believe 30% was what was determined to be their fair share of those costs. I can't remember what slide it was, around like 30.
It's in the, I'm sorry to interrupt. Pamela, it may help you. It's the second to last specific plan implementation chapter slide, where it talks about the share of.
Oh, slide 37. Let's pull that up. We'll pull up slide 37 for a visual reference. It would help if I shared the screen.
I see. So the estimated project cost, Commissioner Madden, you're absolutely right. The total based on this table is about $42 million.
Right.
Okay, who is paying the 30 million that we don't show here?
Right. Let's take an example. For example, water supply. There is an existing need of additional water storage that was already identified in our water master plan for a project, and the Bay Hill specific plan is adding additional need for water storage. And so they are paying their share for the new need that they are creating of 4.4 million. The additional 20 million is a need that the city had without this project. That cost in that project has already been identified and is a part of our existing water rates. For example, stormwater is another example, whereas we mentioned before that there's a policy that the city developed that no new projects within the specific plan can contribute toward our existing stormwater needs. And so it is not, and so there is not an additional need for stormwater. Access and connectivity, transportation related projects, similar methodology where the need created by Bay Hill is 8.3 million, but there's an existing need of 17 million that the city will pay for out of its capital improvement funds and other road and transportation funds. And so this is what we mean by development is paying their fair share for the need that they're creating. And some of that need exists right now. And the best example of that is, again, water supply.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Okay. Anyone else have questions for staff? Anyone? Mary? Kelly?
Well, through the chair, my questions are really related to B. There's so much, both of them, when I read both, they're intertwined as far as the concepts, the presentations, the bridges, there's so much. So I'm going to reserve my questions for B because that's where I made my notes. And since you two will be presenting that.
Okay. All right. Should we move on then with the YouTube side of the presentation? Okay. Why don't we go ahead and do that? Pamela? Can we have the YouTube presentation now?
Sure, Madeline. So we should have the YouTube team in the room. Usually I go to Josh Fortner to let me know who will be presenting from the YouTube team.
Yes, Madeline, Josh Fortner is an attendee. Can you bring him in as a panelist and he will share his screen?
Do we have to do the resolution first before we go on to the next one? No? Okay.
Hello, Josh, can you hear us?
It looks like Josh has come in as a panelist and we're waiting for him to turn on his camera and unmute. Okay, Malin, it looks like Josh left and is now Cindy again. Hi, Josh.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. I apologize. Google, YouTube, we love Zoom, but it is sometimes can be difficult to utilize. If I could also have 200 individuals brought in as panelists who are attendees. Patrick Flynn will be doing the presentation portion of our slides, and Chris Sharples from Shop Architects will be joining us as our principal architect. And I see Patrick is in with our slide deck up. If you would give us a moment to get Chris Sharples in. Up, I see him as well. And I guess from what I can tell, you likely cannot see me, but can only hear me. I apologize. Honorable Commissioners, City of San Bruno staff, and members of the community, my name is Joshua Portner, and I am the District Real Estate Development Director for Google YouTube in San Bruno. I'd like to start off tonight by saying thank you. Thank you to the commissioners for giving your valuable time and insight over the years to bring us to this moment. Thank you to the City of San Bruno staff and consultants who have spent countless hours putting together the robust and thoughtful package you see before you tonight. And finally, thank you to the members of the San Bruno community for your active participation in helping formulate a long-term vision for the Bay Hill Office Center through the Bay Hill Specific Plan. In 2017, YouTube approached the City of San Bruno with a request to undertake a long-term planning and visioning process for our property holdings in the Bay Hill Office Center. Since then, and through this journey, we have been given the opportunity to further engage with the city and the community of San Bruno, which we have been proud to call our home for over 15 years. Your insightful and thoughtful feedback has allowed us to both align with the city's vision and apply the goals of the Bay Hill Specific Plan to our designs for the built environment. We have been collaborating with a world-class design team, including Shop Architects, who you will hear from tonight in realizing that design vision. COVID has tested us and will continue to test us in many ways. However, YouTube remains committed to San Bruno, and we are excited to continue our growth right here. The Planning Commission's recommendation of approval tonight would be a huge milestone toward the realization of that growth here in the city we call home. Staff has already clearly presented the Bay Hill Specific Plan and associated environmental documents and zoning updates. So our team has put together a presentation focused mainly on YouTube's first phase of development proposed under the new specific plan, aptly named Phase 1. And Patrick, if I can have the next slide. Although staff has already presented this, we have thought about how our sites working together from an architecture, infrastructure, transportation, and building system would work. And while this evening we will not take a deep dive into the entire campus, as much of it is purely conceptual still, Phase 1, which we are discussing tonight, connects into the larger planned campus. Next slide, please. The Bay Hill Specific Plan has been an enjoyable journey with city staff and the San Bruno community through the process of creation that began in 2017 and has brought us here to the San Bruno Planning Commission tonight. Next slide. Google views public benefits as the synergy of three elements: baseline city development impact fees, community benefits, and project benefits. As staff has already clearly outlined, The monetary portion of these elements equates to $130 million over the lifetime of the project. Next slide. Getting a little deeper into these three buckets, the development impact fees are a total of $74 million, of which further breaks down into the San Bruno Affordable Housing Fund for a total of $25 million, the citywide development impact fee, and the area development impact fee. In addition, the project is being required to meet green building codes, include a transportation demand management program, and have ongoing property taxes. Furthermore, these numbers don't include art fees, permit fees, and encroachment fees with a value of in the tens of millions of dollars. Next slide. YouTube is solidifying the community benefits through a development agreement, which, as staff mentioned, is an agreement between the city and YouTube to solidify these payment terms along with other foundational rules regarding our partnership with the city of San Bruno and our vested rights. You can see the amount of $56 million, as city manager Grogan has already mentioned. And furthermore, Google has agreed to that early prepayment for phase 2 with phase 1 that totals $26 million in this community benefit bucket alone. Next slide. Finally, there are additional YouTube project benefits. I'm not going to read all these, but we'll pick 3 that are important to YouTube, and we hope that are also important to the city of San Bruno. We are committed to union labor on this project. We have estimated that throughout the lifetime of the project, over 10,000 construction jobs will be created. In addition, when the project is completed, we have estimated there will roughly be a $4.8 million annual tax revenue increase for our property taxes going straight to the city of San Bruno. And finally, our sustainable design includes no net new greenhouse gas emissions, among other sustainable elements that shop architects will mention further in the presentation. Next slide. Getting deeper into phase 1. Next slide. Phase 1 is split into 2 buildings. We have submitted plans to add 240 net new trees planted both within the public right-of-way and our private space as well. Next slide. We will be creating a 4-shuttle multimodal center that we'll talk about a little bit later in this presentation. We're creating subterranean parking to meet the needs of the project. We're installing public bikeways for the approved San Bruno walk and bike path. Again, these statistics are just for the phase 1 project. We'll be doing 2 acres of public accessible space. We'll be doing 4 acres of upgraded infrastructure and road, including a public dedication of Grundy Avenue. There's that commitment to zero use of fossil fuels again. And finally, we'll be installing an 800 kilowatt photovoltaic solar panel system on the roofs of these buildings. Next slide. I'd like to hand off the presentation now to Chris Sharples, principal and founder of Shop Architects and our lead architectural design.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you, commissioners, for allowing us this opportunity to share with you the vision for phase 1. Just to orient everybody, we've got I-380 just to the north of the 2 buildings, with Grundy bisecting between the 2, and then Bay Hill just to the south, and Cherry directly to the west. Next slide. You know, one of the key things as we started developing this design with the whole team was really grounded in the Google principles of place. One of the key things to creating great architecture is creating a great public realm experience, and that's critical to this project. The other aspect is we've all been facing for the past year and a half is this growing need to have a better connection with the outdoors and nature. So that's going to play a big role, not only in terms of how we design the interior spaces, but also the public realm just beyond the facade of the building. And at the same time, really focusing on, resiliency models for this and really allowing innovation to sort of draw this through the whole project. And at the end of the day, phase one really will become sort of the groundwork and the basis for the growth of the campus over the next 15 to 20 years. Next slide. So the thing is, want to sort of start with the existing condition. It's as we've seen, it's prioritizing the car over the pedestrian and the cyclist. Next slide. And you see that also in the streets and the narrow widths of the sidewalks. Really addressing this in the vision of the new buildings for phase one and the public right-of-way. Next slide. This is another aspect, is really scaling the architecture to people and moving away from these solid boxes, sort of opaque, introverted spaces, and really beginning to open them up to the city and the surroundings. Next slide. And really understanding that we're not about trying to create a street wall here, but really trying to create the softened, open edges that really invite people to really take delight as they're moving along these corridors and streetways. Next slide. So how could YouTube's new building support a great public realm experience? So we look at a bunch of different precedents for this, and not to say that we're looking to bring Stanford here, but the idea of bringing bicycles, a great pedestrian experience, using landscape as a way not only to buffer against traffic, but to really soften these edges and allow the architecture to sort of be the backdrop for this unfolding drama. Next slide. And also understanding how we position the architecture as it relates to the street and to this public right-of-way. Instead of creating a wall, but really creating this idea of sort of pockets of open space that connect with this link that brings you through the site. Next slide. Next slide. The other thing that's important is, and not that we're looking to design a Gothic revival for YouTube's new building, but how we look at fenestration and ways to break down the scale of these buildings so they really have this relationship to the pedestrian and to the cyclist. Next slide. And so again, back to the sort of aerial view, a lot of focus on, as you can see in the way that the building is crenellated along these public right-of-ways and creating these sort of pockets of space and open areas, allowing us to plant more trees, more vegetation. And also in terms of the roofscape, as Josh described, we're creating, 800 kilowatts of solar power off the roof, and there's also skylights that will be used to naturally daylight a lot of the workspace inside the two buildings. You also see a bridge connection across Grundy, which is at the second level, which we call the campus loop. And this allows a lot of the YouTubers to actually move freely from one building to the other without having to cross it at grade. Next slide. And this is sort of like just a sort of a little section cut of a portion of the elevation. And what you see here is, you see the buffering of the sidewalk with the green landscape, the bike path, the sort of how the landscape begins to move in towards the architecture. And in this case, working with Surface Design, the landscape architects for this project, how we can literally take the landscape up into the architecture of the building. So really making biophilia one of the critical materials, not only in terms of the ground plane experience, but how we begin to dematerialize and develop the architecture of the new buildings. Next slide. The other aspect is, as I was mentioning earlier, is how we can begin to break down the overall scale of these buildings through the fenestration. And in this case, tilting the glass and creating these light shelves that actually shade the interior space from direct light, reduce solar gain, which again has a positive impact on your energy loads, and at the same time create views without glare out to the surrounding landscape. Next slide. And so what you're starting to see here is a series of views. You're coming down from Cherry Street, you're on Grundy, approaching the entrances into the two buildings. And again, you see the sort of unfolding of this landscape as you're moving along. And again, you're not having confronted by this street wall, but this whole idea of creating this sort of layered drama of architecture, and then using the landscape to soften the edges and actually pull it up into the buildings. Next slide. And then this is a view on Bay Hill. You're looking up towards Cherry. And here you can see the bike path. We created a generous sidewalk, very different from what we have today. And again, you see how the landscape becomes a buffer and softens that relationship with the architecture. At the same time, you know, creating that sense of openness, you know, of really feeling that these aren't going to be opaque buildings anymore, but really trying to really open them up and give that sense of openness. And then you see the landscape again beginning to frame those portions. Next slide. And here you're at Cherry, again, in this case, looking east, you see the two bike lanes framing the vehicular route with the pedestrian right away to the just to the left of the bikeway and then the building beyond. And again, you can see the articulation of the facade, looking at means to really break down the scale of the building. Next slide. And then this is a view from Grundy looking towards Cherry. You're sort of leaving, you've just been dropped off at the intermodal hub and you're sort of walking up towards the entrances. You can see the bridge across the campus loop connection at the second level that connects the two buildings together over Grundy. And again, the landscape plays a big role in really defining the sort of the architectural experience as you're moving along these streets. And then in this view, here you're actually at the second level, you're crossing the bridge over Grundy, and this is the campus loop that connects the two buildings together. Next slide. And as Josh mentioned, you know, a great deal of focus on creating a resilient strategy here, a very sustainable strategy in terms of really embracing a lot of important goals. One of them, you know, obtaining LEED Platinum for this project, but also not relying on fossil fuels to support, you know, the energy loads for this project. And then, as I mentioned, solar panels on the roof, utilizing landscaping to reduce heat island effect. And again, biophilia, again, really looking at health and well-being as an important component, not only for the people who work here, but as people sort of walk around, you know, around the building in the public realm. Next slide. And one last thing I'm going to mention at Cherry Plaza, this is going to be a publicly accessible open space, privately owned by YouTube. And it's going to be another addition to the sort of a necklace of open space parks that move along Cherry Street and bisect into the Bay Hill and Grundy streets. Next slide. So Surface came up with some really beautiful concepts for this space. Again, creating something that really is scaled for people. And the architecture, and in this case, the existing 1,000 Cherry building really becomes just a backdrop to this landscape drama. Next slide. And here's a view where the public can actually, you know, stop and hang out, you know, maybe pick up something up from the market and have lunch here, but really trying to create a welcoming environment along these commercial corridors. And I'm going to turn it now back over to Josh. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chris. Next slide, please. Our project is combined with a robust TDM to shift demand over time from single occupancy vehicles to active models and shared resources. At this time, this program has allowed us to reduce our needs for single occupancy vehicles by 43%. We do expect further opportunities through innovation and technology to continue to drive the reduction in single occupancy vehicles down. Next slide. Phase 1 includes the build out of a multimodal center. To align with Google and YouTube's robust TDM plan, as I mentioned, the project team is committed to complete a multimodal center, which you can see the location and plan here. Next slide. Large enough to fit 4 shuttles at a time, it has been designed to accommodate all needed shuttles for the full build out of the YouTube campus. Most importantly, we are constructing this center with a first phase to remove our shuttle drop-offs from the public right-of-way. Next slide. The design intent is to complete a shuttle area with the same high-quality materials that you'll see throughout the Bay Hill specific plan. Next slide. And in closing, just thank you again. We have members of our design team here from architecture, civil engineers, transportation engineers, landscape engineers, and other development members of my team. And we will try to answer any and all questions you have. We are just so excited to be at this moment and be able to show off this project to you and have your consideration for recommendation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Before they go, is there any questions from the commission to the folks from YouTube?
Through the chair, I have a question.
Please go right ahead.
I have a few questions. So thank you for your presentation, Joshua. It's excellent and thorough. I have questions on the report. Would be on page 2 of the report. I wanted to talk about the traffic plan and the traffic flow. I think that's one of the things I hear the most from community and for myself is you've got a great plan. By the way, thank you for the tour that we had, opportunity that we had to tour the project, and great parking opportunities. And so I think that you're really accommodating all the parking. The to and from is really the question. You know, it's like, you know, can San Bruno accommodate? And at that left turn as you're heading east and turning in onto Cherry, those types of traffic flows. I know that with having shared driving and your bus transportation is going to reduce it drastically. But in the meantime, thinking about how the flow of the traffic, can you speak to that a bit?
Sure, Commissioner Johnson. Before we get to that question, Patrick, if you don't mind, can you take the presentation off the share screen? Thank you. Commissioner Johnson, I heard your questions on traffic and transportation. So since, as I mentioned, we have a team, so Taylor McAdams from Fear Peers will address this issue. Perfect. Taylor, are you in the room?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So we studied the whole plan, or the site as a whole. We also specifically looked at the phase 1, and I can share my video if that's helpful too. Okay, it's a little blurry. So we looked at a few scenarios. One is the full plan. And then, as I mentioned, there's phase 1, because the full plan we studied as if it were built out 10, 20 years into the future. Phase 1, we looked at being built out actually in the near term, 2022. So we we looked at, conditions from a variety of perspectives, including a traditional measured level of service, and that is kind of how traffic flows through an intersection, and it measures, to simplify it, the ease with which traffic flows through an intersection. And so we looked at some key study intersections, including either end of Bay Hill Drive and so the city has level of service standards, and under the phase 1 development, everything met those level of service standards, with a few exceptions. And at those exceptions, that's where we introduced new improvement measures. The traffic signal at Traeger and Bay Hill, Traeger and San Bruno Avenue, for example, is one of those measures. That was where, in a location where we saw that the traffic was going to overwhelm the intersection from San Bruno's standards, and so City of San Bruno standards, and so we recommended the signal. But for the most part, the number of vehicle trips added, especially as a result of phase 1, do not cause any concern. We also looked at safety, and YouTube's presentation did a great job presenting and as well as the kind of public realm slides that Elaine shared earlier discuss how the pedestrian environment will be dramatically improved, as well as with new bike lanes, that experience will be improved.
Well, thank you for giving me that input. Just based upon the observation of the past and recognizing you're going to be adding, I believe I read 1,896 parking spaces, that traffic in itself. That doesn't mean every one of those will get used, but I'm just trying to process it in my head, process it that there is some method in there, because on the north and south side of Cherry it's a pretty long line on both ends when you're trying to get in and out during those commute hour times. And so, the reality is we do expect an increase in traffic patterns. I don't think you can alleviate that, recognizing that you're increasing, but what can be done, that's the key thing. I can mitigate that to minimize it, and so therefore it doesn't create a backup and a frustration and an upset, in our community. So thank you for that input.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, and then the other question that I have is on answer the one on community benefits. The one on page 3 of the report, down on Cherry Plaza. Now, recognizing that people really do like to congregate, they do like to get together. If it's going to be public, there's going to be more potential for that, and you're encouraging that. And so I look at it, my hat on, thinking, okay, what's the security going to be like? What's the maintenance? What if the community starts asking for a children's area? So what's the capacity in that? Is it designed for people who might be shopping at Bay Hill and they want to go have lunch there, or someone just want to meet a friend for coffee there, and they take their own? Is that the intent? What happens if community wants to start using it for some level of events? And they'll say, okay, very much like San Bruno Park, there are those areas that you can reserve, and then there are the areas that you get there really early, and you plop you tape down your tablecloths on it. What happens if that starts to happen? And will it be policy and guidelines? I know this is a really fun and beautiful place to think about, but I can't help but think about those potential other uses. Will it be a first come, first serve? Will it be a reserve? You know, are they going to be open specific hours? And what happens if there's liability and there's hurt and something takes place there? You know, I think I might have said already that somebody wants a children's area, and maybe instead of having a children's area, maybe it's supporting our current public parks to create other types of things. So anyway, those questions come to mind. You know, it is an area that I've spent 45 years doing children's areas, so I can't help but think about these things. So I don't know who would be able to answer that, but that's a question that I have.
Sure. Commissioner Johnson, Javon Grogan, City Manager. Let me begin with a reply. So it is intended to be privately owned, public available space, non-reservable space. And so there will not be the ability for it to be reserved through the city's community services department. There will be a maintenance agreement between the city and YouTube to ensure that the private, the publicly available plaza is maintained to appropriate standards. There will not be the ability for requests for design enhancements to the facility. Those designs, preliminary designs that have been shown that will be reviewed by the city and approved as a part of the phase 1 entitlement will be a part of that and decided at that time. It is intended to be a casual public space, a space for people to stop off on their way to Commodore Park or utilizing the Greenway, or exactly as you mentioned, maybe a patron of the Bay Hill Shopping Center to stop and have a cup of coffee, have a conversation, have lunch. But it is, again, not intended to be programmable space.
Well, I certainly can appreciate and understand the intent, but the reality is these things do come up. And so I think that having some conversation about when people start to congregate in that area, or they start to bring their music to that area and they're enjoying it, you know, if it's beautiful, it's going to be a place that people want to go to. So, you know, maybe it won't happen, but I can't help but think that it could potentially have some level of having to think about it. So I just wanted to put that on those discussion points, and thank you for answering that. And then there was the bridges, the pathways. It was good to see a picture of that. The questions I had prior to seeing the picture, are they visible to, unless you're going down that street, are they going to be visible? Are they open? You know, many from that area going, I live at Bertola Highlands, so I pass by that area practically every day, a couple times a day. And as you move further west, the wind and the fog just gets really intense. And so just thinking about those potential wind tunnels and things, if they, I'm not making any recommendations, and I really don't have any questions. I would just like to be sure that they're giving some thought to that, because sometimes the designers are not from the area. They might be from beautiful warm weather, and it could be, wow, wonderful to walk through there. But when you have that wind, it's not so beautiful. It's really hard. And so just to give that some thought, I would really hope that they would do that. And then my other one, well, the community, the benefits, that was answered. So, and I think the other ones I'll just reserve. They're small. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Is there any other commissioners that have questions? Commissioner Lithen.
Hi, I do have some questions. I'm going to try to keep them organized. I know that the larger community, especially adjacent in the neighborhoods adjacent to the Bay Hill area, are going to be impacted by a number of the things identified in the EIR. The ones that kind of come to mind most for me are the air quality impacts that are not only going to be occurring during construction, but also throughout the life of the use of these new buildings and infrastructure. There was a lot of discussion, and I had some clarifications about that. it looks to me as though there are some standard minimums that were evaluated for the EIR and are in the specific plan and also in the phase one plan. But it sounds to me as though the developers, YouTube, are going to be going kind of above the standards that are set forth in the plan. And so one thing I was kind of curious about was, and I actually think it was mentioned in some of the comments that were sent in by YouTube to the city. What is the air quality standard that the project is measured against? And what are the anticipated fees for non-compliance? What does that mean and look like? I guess I'm looking for some sort of metric to understand what kind of air quality impacts there are going to be during construction and after construction. I'm wondering about there was mention of emissions credit systems, which it was unclear. I was unclear about whether or not there actually was some sort of emission system network in place where fees could be paid forward. There was a little back and forth, and I never quite understood that. And then I was also wondering, I understand there's going to be photovoltaics. I understand that the materials and practices used to construct these buildings are going to be, it seems to me as though being quite environmentally responsible. And I'm curious if the energy that's not created by the photovoltaics, and I understand there's going to be minimal natural gas. I'm wondering if the energy that's going to be used is going to be clean and renewable, and whether or not it's going to be done voluntarily or whether it's required. That's kind of the overview of my air quality concerns.
Pamela, would you like me to tackle those?
Yes, Heidi, thank you.
Okay. So to respond to the first question, what are the metrics, the air quality metrics against which the project is assessed in the EIR? This goes back to CEQA's requirement to establish what are called thresholds of significance against which we identify the level of impact for any project. For criteria air pollutants, which is one of the impacts that was found to be significant and unavoidable, and is the impact that is associated with the mitigation requirement to pay for offset fees. The thresholds are established by the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. They are daily emission thresholds that are tied to the California ambient air quality standards that are essentially governed by the Clean Air Act. They vary depending on what the pollutant is, but just to give you a quick idea, it's 54 pounds per day for NOx, which is nitrogen oxides. It's 54 pounds per day for reactive organic gases, and there are different numbers for particulate matter depending on the size of the particulates. But there are actual numbers established for each of the 6 criteria air pollutants. So those are the thresholds that we use in the EIR. That's standard practice for any EIR in California. Does that answer your question on the metrics?
Yeah, it does. I think I'm also ultimately what I'm trying to get at is trying to have some sort of understanding for the community that's going to be surrounding this area, like what the air quality will be like relative to what we have now, and what it would be like, some sort of comparison, some sort of familiar comparison that we could make as far as, is this similar to a busy downtown? Is this similar to San Francisco? Is this similar to living beside a freeway? I think I'm just trying to understand. There doesn't seem to be, I don't have like a calibration in my mind of what that actually means to a layperson.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I think the best way to characterize it for the layperson is really understanding what the main sources of pollutants are for this type of project. And the main source of pollutants for this type of project in many urban infill development projects is mobile source emissions from vehicles, from cars driving to and from the site. For this project, given that it is so close to public transit and that there are mitigation requirements in place, pretty robust mitigation requirements in place for transportation demand management. I would say, just in my professional assessment, that the project is big and it's certainly generating mobile source emissions. But I think when you view that in context of other comparable urban infill projects, it's lower on the scale, because there is expected to be a strong use of public transportation and carpooling and shuttles and things like that. Other emissions that we look at and are evaluated in the EIR that are primarily related to the toxic air contaminant impact that I talked about in my presentation are impacts from generators. So we call them stationary source emissions. And those are impacts from emergency generators on the site. And those, for a specific plan, are hard to assess with precision because they really do require an understanding of the actual design of a project and where those generators would be and where the nearest sensitive receptors are with respect to those generators. So we did evaluate them for the phase 1 development and found that impacts would be less than significant. For the specific plan, this is why we assigned this mitigation measure that requires future development to prepare these health risk assessments that will look at the specific generators and receptors around them. If significant impacts are identified, they will need to incorporate design features into their projects to mitigate those levels down to a less than significant level.
And I think I've already asked this of staff previously, but as these different phases come along that will be subject to these different inquiries about these emissions, those will also be coming before the Planning Commission as an item by item basis. It's not the approval of the specific plan is not a blanket cover for this. It's actually going to be addressed item by item.
Yeah, that's correct. I'm actually not sure if they all come before commission. They'll certainly all come before council. But yes, each project will be separately entitled, and the city will need to make a finding of consistency with the EIR. And if any project is found to be in any way outside the envelope, essentially, of what was studied in the EIR, then a subsequent CEQA review may need to be required.
Thank you, Heidi. Commissioner Lethen, if I can elaborate a little bit. So the Bay Hill specific plan will provide a guidance for the overall project. The only project level approval that you'll be considering tonight is phase 1. So all the subsequent phases 2 through 5, will still be subject to architectural review permit that are subject to the Planning Commission's purview. As we talked about the program level EIR versus the project level environmental review, depending on whether those subsequent phases may or an additional CEQA review, it may be a negative declaration or a categorical exemption, or like Heidi said, if the program EIR covers for the subsequent phases, they will forward that to you. But for all the phases, design criteria, you'll be reviewing them.
Okay, thank you. That helps a lot. Just a couple things still on the air quality. I'm curious if regarding the energy sources that are not the electricity that's not created by the photovoltaics. I'm curious about where that energy comes from, whether it's going to be clean renewable energy. I know that's kind of an option that's available to most, homeowners and individuals that purchase, energy from PG&E have the opportunity to do that. Will that be done for these projects? And oh gosh, I had another one. Well, that's it for now. I got the next one.
Commissioner Leah, maybe I can take that one. Google has been purchasing clean, renewable energy from the grid for many years now for all of Google and YouTube, including in San Bruno, and we expect to do the same for the new additional projects we're doing here at YouTube. So I assume the question is to make up the net difference between what we're generating on site and what is needed for site. The answer to your question is yes, we will be purchasing clean renewable energy, similar to how you purchase it at home through the Peninsula Clean Energy Group, I believe.
Great. That's the answer I was hoping to hear. And then I'm also wondering if this may be more of a staff question. I'm guessing that that's a voluntary thing. I'm wondering if that is something that can be written into the agreement.
Yes, that will be a voluntary thing. So photovoltaic is not a requirement by the building code or the Cal Green, but there are measures that the project will have to satisfy to be a LEED certified project or to meet the minimum requirement per Cal Green. I'm not the expert in that sense, but I don't believe what you're referring to is a code requirement.
Okay, and I do recall, I think I do recall the LEED certification silver as being a minimum requirement in the specific plan.
That is true.
That's correct?
Yes, Commissioner. In the specific plan, the requirement is LEED silver.
Okay.
We intend to deliver not only phase one, but future phases as well as a LEED platinum level. Now, granted, designs and LEED changes over the years.
Right.
And in addition, there are other property owners within the park that may have never done a LEED project before. And so it's more difficult for them to achieve the levels that we have, YouTube and Google, with the level of expertise we have when we come to projects. But we hope we can share with them our expertise and our expertise beyond the Bay Hill Park to all of San Bruno in regards to sustainable construction.
Great. Okay.
Commissioner Lawson, if I may, so we just found that the solar roof is a requirement identified on page 121 of the specific plan, where new construction in the plant area shall be required to employ at least 30% of the roof coverage with photovoltaic.
Okay, great. That's good news to hear. Just kind of an aside. The generators and the testing of generators, and you'd mentioned that, Heidi, that is something that contributes to the air quality concerns. I'm no expert, and I'm sure that if Commissioner Harmon were here, he could educate me. But the backups, I'm curious, considering that we are having photovoltaics, I'm wondering if there are going to be electric battery backups, in addition to, or maybe in lieu of, fossil fuel, like gasoline, or I'm not sure exactly what kind of fuel would be used for these.
We assumed in the EIR analysis that these would be fuel run emergency generators, and we assumed that they would be tested essentially as often as they could be tested as allowed by the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, which I think offhand is, I want to say 50 days a year, but don't quote me on that. I don't know if there are plans, maybe Josh can answer, to incorporate other types of generators that would emit fewer emissions, but I can say that for the EIR analysis purposes, we did evaluate a worst case scenario, if you will, where they would be fossil fuel based generators.
That's great.
Another excellent question, so I'll just layer on. Phase one does not include a gas generator. As we mentioned, we're committed to no new fossil fuels. That would include gas generators. We are proposing to do a similar system to what you saw on site at the 1400, 1450 Bay Hill site, which is what's called a microgrid, whereby the panels send their energy to a battery system, and that battery system may be used for backup power. Now, all these buildings, due to their height, and again, not to get too deeply into the building code, do not actually require a backup generator by code because they're not at the level of a high-rise construction. So people opt to put those generators in at this level simply to maintain business continuity And so we're choosing to maintain business continuity through a battery system.
Great. Yes, thank you. I did take a tour of the, I'm forgetting the name of this specific, I guess it was the phase 2 of the, I can't remember the address right now. But yes, I did tour it, and I was, that did impress on me YouTube's commitment to the air quality and renewable. So I appreciate that answer, and that's good news to hear. And I understand that, I've left my map, the lakes properties, those are 1150, 1200, and 1250 Bay Hill Drive. I understand that that is going to be used as parking and staging area for phase 1. And thanks to the pandemic, myself and a number of families I know have spent a lot of time walking around Bay Hill Office Park just to get out of the house and move our bodies around during shelter in place. We've become intimately familiar with the ducks that live at the duck ponds at the lakes. And I understand that there are some considerations for, I think it's migratory birds and mitigation measures regarding the care of local native species. But it seems to me that we've created this lovely little bio world for these ducks, and I think they nest there and live there and delight little children and families who come by to sit. And I'm curious what the future of these ducks will be, and whether there will be any sort of pond or anything, any sort of feature like that reintegrated back into the plans. Yeah.
Sure, I'll take that, Commissioner Levin. We have verified with the EIR consultant. Unfortunately, there's not a protected endangered species that has been identified in the final EIR. However, in discussion with the YouTube team, I believe that they will be working on a relocation program for the ducks to a safer habitat for the time being or permanently. Josh, do you want to elaborate?
Yeah, thank you, Director Wu. We're just hearing about this now, actually, today. So we have a wonderful, in addition to the environmental program we've been discussing to this point, we have a wonderful ecology program at Google. And we really want to tap into that to answer your question. We're committed to finding a solution in partnership with the city and its community, obviously, you being one of them, to find a solution to essentially, for lack of a better word, save the ducks. I guess we will find a way, but I need to tap into our expertise before we can make a direct response to your ask. So we will be getting with our experts and making recommendations to staff for how to deal with the situation that you mentioned.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I know that the ducks got dropped on you at the last minute because I think I surprised Pamela with that yesterday. So thank you. I appreciate that. And they're really wonderful ducks. So, you know, they kept us company during the pandemic. So thank you. I appreciate that.
No problem.
Let's see. I think that's the bulk of the questions that I have right now. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may, earlier during the meeting, Commissioner Madden lost power. So he's been calling in. So his hand has been raised for him to talk in case you don't know that.
No, I can't see that. So let's go ahead and bring him on. Commissioner Madden, are you there?
Madeline, will you unmute Commissioner Madden? He is an attendee with his hand raised. Go ahead, Commissioner, you're unmuted.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, sorry, right after I asked my questions, power went out and apparently it's not coming on for a few more hours. So I have been watching on YouTube though, fortunately. So following along as best I can. Similar to Commissioner, the first questions that came up regarding traffic are my primary concern. Not only just the amount of cars, but also just safety in general. As I'm sure many people who know live in the area, traffic can get quite backed up due to a number of factors at the intersection of Cherry and San Bruno. I think the mobile or the new location for the bus drop-off area will help that. So I was glad to see that. But I do have some concerns about the volume of traffic coming down from 280 from San Bruno to make the turns onto Cherry or Traeger. I don't know if just adding a traffic light at Traeger really solves or mitigates a lot of the volume increase. And then I also saw in the presentation there was a diagram showing these rectangles around each intersection signal, and it seemed like potentially adding that signal at Traeger could potentially cause backups into El Camino. So my overall question is just, has someone, either the traffic consultant or the Department of Public Works, considered at things like changing the timings of the traffic signals to adjust for this large increase in cars? Have we looked at things like changing the speed limits, especially coming downhill from 280 on San Bruno, where people already drive pretty fast, and that left turn onto Cherry can get backed up, where it's literally you can only have one lane to go down the hill when that line gets really long to make the turns. Similarly at Traeger, if we're adding a signal there, are we going to be causing backups for people who just want to go toward El Camino from uphill to downhill, or vice versa? And then of course we have a mall there that people have a hard time getting in and out of at certain times of the day because of people coming to work or shuttle buses. And now we're talking about obviously increasing the office space by 2.6 million square feet, I believe, and then potentially building housing on top of Bay Hill Mall and other housing developments. And so I just want to make sure that I know these are unavoidable and they will have negative impacts, but that our plan is just not simply add a traffic light. So if someone could address that.
Sure, Commissioner Madden. Madeline, if Taylor's still back in the room, Taylor, do you mind addressing that question? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm still here. So yeah, these are all those very good questions, and rest assured that we are not just adding a traffic light. That's just what, the average person will notice as the biggest difference. But and the two intersections you mentioned are two that we studied in detail. So San Bruno and Cherry, and San Bruno and Traeger, as well as actually you mentioned San Bruno and El Camino. All three of those were study intersections that we looked at. We collected count data, so the traffic patterns that you have observed, we collected that information, that formed our baseline. That was pre-COVID, so in the before bad times of commuting. So that's what we started with, and we layered on the project trips as well as background growth. So we look at what we think might happen around the project, both in San Bruno and elsewhere in the region. So background growth as well as the project trips that you mentioned. It is correct that there will be a net new project trips, but again, when we did our detailed level of service analysis, we only found a few instances, and you can see in the specific plan, the draft specific plan, that where there would where there are locations that exceed the city of San Bruno's standards. In those locations, we have suggested mitigation measures, which not CEQA mitigation measures, just improvement measures that address all of those level of service effects. And so all of them can be addressed. We also, even at intersections that will not experience a level of service increase, always suggest signal timing improvements, which was one of the ideas you suggested, Commissioner Madden, and that is something we always recommend. We actually recommend for this plan that signal timing be optimized after every phase, because of how even small tweaks can make a really big difference in traffic flows. So an example also at Cherry and San Bruno Avenue, there's a current project to add a new turn lane from Cherry onto San Bruno Avenue. I don't know if that's been implemented in the city yet, but that actually was something that was happening. What was that? Well, I wasn't sure if you wanted to add something in the conference room, but so that's something that's being done there. And then you asked about safety and how fast cars drive on San Bruno in particular. And what even better than changing the speed limit is actually changing the lane widths on San Bruno Avenue. Speed limits rarely do much to slow people down on their own. You need to actually change the design of a street to encourage people to go slower. And so that's partly why we have adjusted the lane widths on San Bruno Avenue and on many of the streets within the specific plan area. A standard lane width is 12 feet. Many of the specific plan streets are in exceedance today of 13 or 14, which encourages speeding. And so we have most of the specific plan improvements call for 12 at a maximum, or 11 or even 10-foot lane widths. Standard practice minimum is 9. We don't have any 9-foot widths within this plan, but we have reduced those lane widths, and that's the main thing we can do to slow speeding on San Bruno Avenue. And I think the last piece of your question was a concern about queues back onto El Camino, and that's something we did a detailed queuing analysis, and we didn't find any issues of queues.
Okay, thank you. Just real quick on the speed limit thing.
Yeah.
So I'm mainly talking about, and those of you who live in town know this. When you're coming 280 north or south, for that matter, and you want to get onto San Bruno and head down the hill toward El Camino, there's like no, you're not allowed to turn on a red light because people already speed really badly coming under the freeway overpass. And now we're going to be having a lot more cars come off those off ramps in either direction, and the potential for speeding increases in my mind, no matter if you narrow the lanes or not. Just full disclosure, I'm a civil engineer by training. So I know a little bit about traffic patterns. I don't do it daily, but I do know a little bit about it way yonder. But I don't see that as a very effective way to slow people down. What I would hope to see is something, because as you speed down and you approach Cherry Avenue, there's some bends and things that happen in the road, and the traffic signal at Cherry is on the downhill coming down San Bruno, and it can be hard to stop. Have you guys considered anything like installing sign or electronic signs like we have in foggy areas that say like prepare to stop because it's anticipating a change from green to red in the lights that may be not visible yet as you come around some of those bends. I've also seen, like in Pacifica, I've seen these, they're signs that kind of tell you how fast you're driving and to slow down. They'll even incorporate like red and blue lights from like a police car would have, just to get people to slow down. Because again, I think it's more a matter of the chances of people speeding or driving more dangerously is because simply the matter of more volume, significantly more volume. So I would hope that some kinds of measures like that would be incorporated along with major upgrades to the traffic signals, especially at Cherry and San Bruno, because coming out of the residential area of on Cherry on the south side, it's really poorly done right now. The left turn signal is terrible. It really needs a massive upgrade in that area, even without this project, in my opinion. So I'd hope to see, all efforts made to help the neighborhoods in there stay safe, and not to get everyone frustrated with the amount of new cars, because there is a lot of frustration right now in those areas at certain times of the day. So thanks for hearing me out.
Yeah, no problem. And the last thing I'll add, Pamela, if I can just, one more thing is, so what's typical with a specific plan is we've developed concept designs for all of the streets within the plan area. But with each subsequent phase, those plans will be done in much more detail. So as you saw for phase 1, you're seeing it in a lot more detail than any of the other streets. And so once it comes time to do the pieces of the plan that involve the southern portion of Cherry and San Bruno Avenue, those designs will be refined in a lot more detail, and suggestions like yours to add signage for downhill traffic I think that's a great idea. It's too detailed for the specific plan at this time, but we'll obviously record that comment, and that is something that can be incorporated in future in future phase designs. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other commissioners with questions?
Through the chair, I just wanted to follow up on Commissioner Madden's comments and questions, which I think are excellent. He does echo a lot of the community public opinion regarding traffic concerns around this project. My question, I guess it's for the city. Why hasn't this been vetted by traffic and safety and parking prior to this conversation? If it has, I would like to know. Because the questions are very legitimate, the concerns are legitimate, and it sounds like some studies have been done, but haven't most recently been on traffic and safety. I don't recall this being brought to us. It may be happening in the future, but it just seems like the conversation tonight would have benefited from that committee discussing and vetting and giving their own recommendations as well. So if I'm missing something, I would like to know, and if it's going to happen in the future, I would like to know as well, and if it hasn't happened, I'd like to know why.
Sure. Commissioner Durazo, I'm going to turn the bulk of that question over to our interim Public Works Director, Haywan Ritchie. But first, I'll say that all required reviews have taken place. Entitlements like this do not go to the TSPC committee. The loading zone did go to the committee, and as a part of our normal and customary process, entitlements do not go for an advisory review to the TSPC. Director Ritchie?
Yes, thank you, City Manager Grogan. Haywan Ritchie, Interim Public Works Director. Good evening, Commissioners. Regarding the question on San Bruno Avenue, I think there were multiple components components to that. Yes, the TSBC is evaluating traffic calming. I think the traffic calming program that we have in place right now is really focused on the residential areas. We do receive input regarding the arterials and the more heavily traveled streets, and those do get evaluated by our traffic engineer. And as improvements are evaluated, those would be brought forth to the Traffic Safety Parking Committee. Regarding the intersection, something Commissioner Madden had mentioned on Cherry and San Bruno. As you may or may not be aware, there is actually a project currently that's under construction. Right now there is a backlog of holes, and it's taking them longer to procure, but there will be some substantial improvements at that corner. Some of the ADA ramps, the Americans with Disability Act curb ramps have been updated with the previous project, but the signals themselves will be changed, and so the timing and the phasing will be altered and evaluated and updated as part of that project. There currently is a speed feedback sign in an attempt to reduce speeds. However, as our transportation planner Taylor McAdams had mentioned, there's multiple components to reducing speeds, and one of them is to install additional features like narrowing lane widths and bike lanes. But I think in order to implement what we have in the specific plan, it actually is quite extensive amount of infrastructure work, which that would need to be planned over time, including narrowing lanes and adding buffered bicycle lanes. And so that does take time to implement and fund, which the behavioral specific plan would help fund that. YouTube would, of course, pay their fair share along with other development that would occur in the behavioral specific plan and other development projects throughout the city through the development impact fee and through grants, that as they become available, and city funds. I'm hoping that answers the question, but I'm happy to answer any additional.
That will suffice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Tarazas, do you have any further questions or?
Chair, not at this moment.
Okay, so I think at this point we'll open it up to public comment. Madeline, is there anyone out there with their hand raised?
Yes, Chair, we do have one hand raised.
Okay, before we take that person, let me remind the folks at home that if you would like to address the commission at this point in time, if you're on Zoom, use the raise your hand button. If you're on the phone, please use *9. You'll be given 3 minutes to speak. And Madeline, go ahead and please introduce our next speaker.
To the chair, Commissioner Biasotti, would you mind if we take a break? I just want to be mindful that we've been at it for, I think, about 3 hours now, and some people may need a small break.
Of course. How long would you like to take? What would you suggest?
5 minutes.
Okay, fine. We're adjourned for 5 minutes.
Like another minute or?
Well, let's see. Is everybody here?
Madeline, do you see all of the commissioners back yet?
I do not.
I see Commissioner Madden still with us.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm still here. I'm about to switch onto a computer though.
Okay. So I think we're all back online. You have 5 commissioners with you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. All right, so once again, we're going to go back to public comment for this item, for these 2 items actually. For the folks at home that would like to comment that are on Zoom, please use the raise your hand button. And for those at home on the phone, please use *9. And I think, Madeline, we had somebody waiting.
We do. James, I'm going to bring you in the room to talk. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All righty. Well, good evening, commissioners, honorable commissioners, hardworking city staff, and I would be remiss if I didn't compliment our city manager Grogan on knowing the ins and outs of our community and his community, having the ability to articulate and answer the questions and give the background to the questions is truly impressive. And I feel fortunate that we have him as a city manager. Good evening to the presenters. Excellent job doing the presentations tonight, and Google and YouTube, and the EIR consultant, and good evening to any citizens that may be on the line. My name is James Vergomez. I live at 1861 Donner Avenue here in San Bruno. I'm speaking on behalf of the San Mateo Building and Construction Trade Council, and I rarely get to speak in my home city on projects. The San Mateo Building and Construction Trade Council is comprised of 24 construction unions and 16,000 highly skilled men and women. And we are proud to speak tonight as a partner to Google YouTube in regards to the 10,000 construction jobs that they are going to be providing to our community. And this is not just going to simply be a handshake deal. This will be codified through a community workforce agreement, formerly known as project labor agreements, but we renamed them to community workforce agreements because they offer benefits, unquantifiable benefits back to the community by hiring local contractors, local journey workers, local apprentices, returning veterans from the military through a helmets to hard hat program. And through this agreement, it'll ensure that the work and family platform will be adhered to, that the construction workers coming into our town will not be paid poverty wages. They'll be paid on the work and family platform, which is a decent wage. Even though we receive a decent wage, half our wage goes to mortgages and rents. Healthcare, not only for the worker, but for the family. Something to retire on. Those retirement dollars are reinvested into the community through municipal bonds. And finally, skilled and trained education, one of the largest privately funded education systems in these United States, to ensure that these buildings will be built right the first time, on time, and on budget. And these buildings will be buildings that all of our constituents will be proud of. I would like to thank, on behalf of those 16,000 members, I'd like to thank Google YouTube for making this commitment to our construction workers. When people ask me what unions are, it's simple. It's work and family standing together. And we're proud that Google YouTube is standing with our working families. And we'd like to encourage the Planning Commission to pass these resolutions tonight and encourage with the recommendation to City Council to pass them as well. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight, and have a great evening.
Thank you very much. Madeline, do we have anyone else with their hands raised?
Yes, we do. Dean, I'm going to allow you to speak.
And you have 3 minutes.
Yeah, okay, everybody can hear me? Okay, planning commissioners and staff, you folks have worked really hard on this project. We purchased 801, 851 Traeger, which is what the properties that I represent. And in 2016, not knowing what we were getting ourselves into. But it's been a fun project. It's a project that I think is going to be of great benefit to San Bruno and the people in San Bruno. My family came to California in the Bay Area with the De Anza Party back in 1775. So we've been in the San Francisco Bay Area a long time. We've seen San Bruno grow. We're really proud to be part of San Bruno at this point. We do want to do residential at some point, and we know that we have a ways to go to make that happen. And I was happy to hear actually that you had so many other residential properties in the queue, so to speak. But we'll be back there in the back to try to help out with the housing in San Bruno as well. So we'd like to encourage the Planning Commission to approve the EIR and the specific plan. And we hope to work with you in the future on our specific project down the line. So again, thank you very much. And it's a great project, and we're really happy to be part of it. Thanks again.
You're welcome. Thank you. And Madeline, do we have anyone else that wants to speak to us?
Yes, we do. Larry, I am going to bring you into the room.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. My name is Larry Gandelman. I am with Porter Consulting, and we represent the Police Credit Union located at 1250 Grundy Lane, just to the immediate east of the Phase 1 projects you're discussing tonight. We have had the very good fortune of dealing with Josh, Patrick, Drew, many folks from the Google and YouTube teams on projects that we have engaged together at 1250 Grundy Lane, and we couldn't be more pleased. They are a first-class organization. Everything they've done to date has been first class. They are incredibly committed to excellence. We, the credit union, and all our 45,000 members support this project completely and thoroughly. We cannot wait for Phase 1 to begin, so we strongly urge the Commission to go ahead and move forward, and hopefully the Council approving the EIR and the specific plan. And we are looking forward to having YouTube as our long-term neighbors to the west. So thank you for taking my comments, and we'll look forward to the approvals.
Thank you very much. And Madeline, do we have anyone else who would like to speak to us?
I do not see any more hands raised.
Okay, thank you. I guess we'll need a roll call vote from the Commission to close the public hearing. Would anyone like to make a motion, please?
I motion to close public comment.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. May we have a roll call vote, please, Pamela?
Chair Biasotti?
Aye.
Commissioner DeRosa?
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
Commissioner Lethen?
Aye.
Commissioner Madden?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Public comment is now closed. So at this time, is there any other further conversation the Commission would like to have on these projects? If not, we have two items to bring forward separately, 4A and 4B, as separate resolutions. So if someone would like to make a resolution on 4A, that would be. Pending any other conversation.
Let's see. Through the chair, I'll make a recommendation. I move the Planning Commission adopt resolution 2021-04 and recommend that it moves forward to the City Council.
Okay, we have a second.
Second.
Thank you. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Pamela, can we get a roll call vote, please?
It is in the resolution.
Yeah, that's fine.
Chair Biasotti?
Aye.
Commissioner DeRosa?
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
Commissioner Lethen?
Sorry, I can't scroll through my PDFs to find the next one. Aye.
Great. Commissioner Madden?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, thank you. So item 4B, the adoption of the resolution for the City Council to approve the vesting tentative map and architectural review permit. Does anyone want to make a motion on that one or comments?
I have it in front of me. If you want me to do it, I'm happy to let someone else do it. Move forward.
Go right
Go.
Okay. So I move that the Planning Commission adopt resolution 2021-05 with attachment 3, recommending that the City Council approve a vesting tentative map TM 19-001, an architectural review permit AR 19-004, and developmental agreement DA 21-002, subject to the following recommendations as presented.
Thank you. And do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Pamela, can we get a roll call vote, please?
Chair Biasotti?
Aye.
Commissioner Durazo?
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
Commissioner Lethen?
Aye.
Commissioner Madden?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for all your hard work on this project. Staff, YouTube, the consultants, the commission. Thank you, everybody. It was a lot of work. Thank you very much. All right. Item 5, selection of architectural review members for September 16th.
I'm available.
Chair. And thank you. Oh, all right. So without me asking, so I see Commissioner Johnson and Commissioner Durazo. Can I have one? Well, do we need to bring Commissioner?
Oh, you're right. Are they still with us?
To be back with us.
I forgot. I thought they'd be gone by now.
Madeline, can you bring them back? Thank you.
Will do.
Madeline, can you let me know when you're here? Because I can't see them on my screen.
Okay. I believe.
Keep in mind, there is a power outage. I don't know how widespread it is, but.
Yeah.
We see Commissioner Morgan coming back. Madeline, do we know if we still have Vice Chair with us?
I don't see Vice Chair in the room.
Okay, well, we tried. Maybe the power outage also affected him. As we were taking volunteers, so I have noted Commissioner Johnson and Commissioner Durazo for the September ARC meeting. I just need one more person and a backup. Commissioner Morgan, I can't hear you, but I assume you're volunteering. Thank you.
I can be the backup if need be.
Thank you, Commissioner Madden.
Excellent.
All right, back to you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so that brings us to item 6, which is public comments for items not on the agenda. This is the last chance for the folks at home to speak to the commission on items that we did not have on the agenda this evening. Once again, Zoom users, raise your hand. Folks at home on the phone, please *9, and we'll give you a minute to dial in. Madeline, if you'd let us know if there's anybody there.
We do not have any hands raised, Chair.
Thank you very much. And with that, we'll move on to item 7, items from members and subcommittees. Anyone have anything for the commission? No? All right, well, once again, I would just like to thank everyone for all their hard work on this project. It's going to be special. And with that, we're adjourned until September 21st, 2021 at 7 p.m. Good night, everyone.